The popular torrenting site Rarbg has shut down. When attempting to visit their main website, rarbg.to, or any of their mirrors, you'll be greeted with this message that says, "Hello guys, we would like to inform you that we have decided to shut down our site. The past 2 years have been very difficult for us. Some of the people in our team died due to COVID complications, others still suffer the side effects of it, not being able to work at all. Some are also fighting the war in Europe on both sides. Also, the power price increase in data centers in Europe hit us pretty hard. Inflation makes our daily expenses impossible to bear. Therefore, we can no longer run this site without massive expenses that we can no longer cover out of pocket. After a unanimous vote, we've decided that we can no longer do it. We are sorry. Frowny face. Bye." Now, this is a huge disappointment because Rarbg really was one of the most popular torrenting sites. I'd say it was probably number 2 just behind the Pirate Bay, but I probably frequented Rarbg more because they would get higher quality uploads, like 4K uploads of content. They're the source that I used to download Narcos and a couple of episodes of Better Call Saul that weren't on my friend's Netflix account. All these reasons that they gave for shutting down. Of course, COVID death sucks. This war in Europe, the Russian-Ukrainian war, has really negatively impacted peer-to-peer file sharing because I feel like those two countries in particular were really hotspots for pirated media, pirated software, and cracked software. The prices for video games on Steam have notoriously been low for Russians for a while now, and some people say that a big reason for this is because piracy is so rampant in Russia that you can just buy any bootleg game that you want from vendors on the streets of Moscow, similar to the bootleg watch and bootleg handbags that people sell on the streets of New York. So I guess that easy access to pirated media that Russians supposedly have, and the fact that most Russians probably can't afford to spend $60 on a game or $50 on a new movie, means that Steam or any other vendor of media that wants to be in this market has to set their prices accordingly. Otherwise, they're just going to be outcompeted by pirates, many of whom are, I guess, now shooting bullets at one another in trenches instead of shooting awesome content across the internet to our BitTorrent clients. It's very sad. And the last things that were listed were the prices for their hosting, the increased costs coming from data centers in Europe. Now, this is something that I don't think most people understand because, well, most people have never made a website. So you've got to pay for a domain name so that people can actually find your website. Otherwise, they'll have to type in an IP address and a port number into their browsers. And ain't nobody got time for that. So domain names, those are usually an annual bill of like $10 or $20, but Rarbg or Rarbg, whatever you want to call them, they had probably about a dozen mirrors of the site with different domain names so that if one got taken down, you could still access the torrents and the forums and stuff like that. But then there's other costs that come with running a site, like the hosting. You got to pay for some kind of box in a data center somewhere, Europe in this case, and that box needs to have enough resources to hold all the data and handle all the bandwidth. Now, this is something that you might expect to be really expensive for a site like Rarbg because this is one of the most popular torrenting websites. But if you really think about it, the owners of Rarbg are pretty much just hosting a text-based site like a forum. They don't need to seed torrents on their hard drives because torrents are decentralized. It's peer-to-peer. It's on the person who's posting the torrents or posting the magnet link to seed that torrent for a particular amount of time or a particular ratio. And then from there, the torrent and the files associated with it will be available as long as someone in the world still has that file on their hard drive and their torrent application or daemon is running and they have an active internet connection. So while there is no doubt in my mind that, yeah, increases in hosting costs along with everything else mentioned here had contributed to the collapse of Rarbg, I think there's another reason that's not mentioned here, which is changes to Bulgaria's laws regarding piracy and running piracy websites. So in case it wasn't obvious, Rarbg has Bulgarian roots, that's where the BG comes from, and historically, Bulgaria has been pretty lax about enforcing intellectual property laws, about prosecuting people who violate those laws, and about reporting intellectual property violations to other countries, mainly to the United States. Because when you think of people pirating games, movies, music, and even software, most of that media that is being produced and then shared in torrents is coming from American companies. That's why we have documents like this 2015 Special 301 report, which is an annual review of the current state of intellectual property enforcement with US trade partners around the world. This is kind of like when you were in kindergarten and the teacher had that good kid board with all of your classmates' names, and each one would have a certain number of gold stars or frowny faces next to them to show how good of a student they were being. So we've got this priority watch list with countries like China and Pakistan, Algeria, Russia, Ukraine, Argentina. These countries, they all have got a bunch of frowny faces next to their names. We'll tell them, hey guys, you gotta stop stealing from the heckin' US Hollywood elites, okay? Those guys need more money. But they just tell us to go screw ourselves, which is no surprise because half of that list is US adversaries. Now, if we look at just the watch list, okay, these guys are, I guess, mostly US allies or generally neutral towards us, okay? So they've got gold stars in a lot of other places, but they still aren't buying enough media from our hecking Hollywood elites, okay? Come on, guys. Disney needs to hire more people for their private police force so that they can cart you out of the park if you choke on a chicken wing, because nobody dies at Disney. So let's take a look at the section in this document that's pertaining to Bulgaria, okay? This is like the report card that the US wrote up for little Bulgaria. Bulgaria is on the watch list in 2015. Despite some incremental progress on IPR protection and enforcement, the United States continues to have serious concerns regarding Bulgaria's actions to enforce its IPR laws and to significantly reduce internet piracy. Wow, this really does read like a report card of a kid that's just started to act out in class. You know, they just started to hang out with the wrong people. Bulgaria's cybercrime division has done outstanding work on IPR enforcement over the years, but its effectiveness was drastically reduced after the division was transferred to the State Agency for National Security in October 2013. The United States understands that the current government plans to return the division to the Ministry of Interior and urges that this be done as soon as possible. The United States also encourages Bulgaria to devote the necessary resources to improving the prosecution of IPR cases. And then this goes on to say how in some years Bulgaria had lots of checks for copyright infringement on the internet, and they had like 743 cases in 2013, but then in 2014 there were only 13 cases that they looked into. Now, fast forward a few years to the 2022 Special 301 report. Bulgaria isn't on the priority watch list. They're not even on the regular watch list. Bulgaria was removed from the watch list back in 2018 because they pinky promised that they would commit to fighting internet copyright infringement. And Professor America looked in little Bulgaria's eyes and believed it. Bulgaria was a good boy, just being influenced by the kids with frowny faces like Russia and Venezuela. But in 2022, it looked like Bulgaria was starting to head back towards being on the priority list, because just 2 months ago, when the United States had its annual intellectual property report to Congress, the lack of intellectual property protections that Bulgaria had was said to be part of Bulgaria's larger rule of law problems. Now, when you're a country like Bulgaria, I'd imagine that it's kind of scary for the United States, who acts like the police of the world to say that you have a rule of law problem, because it kind of sounds like Uncle Sam wants to come over and make himself the rule of law. Also, I would be a little bit insulted if I was Bulgarian and the US is telling my country that we have a rule of law problem, because according to these stats, crime and just the general perception of safety is worse in the United States than compared to Bulgaria. Like, don't get me wrong, I'm sure that Bulgaria has its problems, but when the country with more prisoners per capita than any other is pressing you about piracy on the internet, saying that you have a crime problem, well, that'd make me feel kind of upset. So I strongly believe that the main reason that Rarbg was shut down, or at least one of the reasons, which isn't listed on their website, is pressure from the Bulgarian government, which really is pressure from the US government, because Bulgaria didn't really give a rat's ass about piracy until Hollywood elites figured out how to join torrent swarms, and they saw a bunch of Bulgarian flags popping up in the Cedars list, and so they blamed the Bulgarians for, I guess, having to get gold trim instead of platinum trim on their new yachts. Those Bulgarians are going to have to pay. But the beautiful thing about this kind of decentralized peer-to-peer file sharing technology is it really doesn't matter if Bulgaria or any other country that is known for piracy caves to the pressure, because anyone can still access most of the torrents that were listed on Rarbg. A Reddit user posted this magnet link in the Pirated Games subreddit. It's under 400 megabytes in its compressed form, and even on my country-ass internet connection, I was able to download it in about the same amount of time it took me to feed my chickens and eat breakfast. Now, uncompressed, this file only takes up about 800 megs, so there's no reason to not seed it or keep it on your hard drive and seed it. It's an 800 meg SQLite database containing every torrent, info hash, and metadata of the torrent that was posted to Rarbg for the past 8 years. Those 3 pieces of information is all anyone really needs to find and download torrents. To browse through the SQLite database, you can just use an SQLite browser like this one from sqlitebrowser.org, and then you can just go to the Browse Data tab, and there you go. It should be pretty straightforward from here. This title column here is the title of your media, so you can search for these titles in the program just like you would on the Rarbg website. Cat is the category of media that the files belong to. Size, of course, is the amount of disk space that the torrent is going to take up on your computer, and I'm pretty sure that this is listed in bytes. IMDb is the IMDb page for whatever media, so just copy this string and paste it to the end of imdb.com/title/, and it'll bring you to that media's IMDb page. And column 2, hash. This is the good stuff. So add this to the end of a magnet link, and you'll be able to download your torrent, which, like I said, those torrents are still going to work as long as people are still seeding them. It's completely independent of the Rarbg website itself. And I wouldn't be surprised if several copycat sites of Rarbg start showing up now, because the only thing that's really missing from this data set that's here is the forum connection and I guess HTML indexing that the website offered, and a little search bar that makes it really easy for normies to find their media. So another torrenting site may have fallen, but as long as data hoarders and web scrapers and torrent seeders are around, this data will always be available to the people with the knowledge of how to use peer-to-peer file sharing software. This data is decentralized, and it'll be around forever.